good afternoon. Really nice to be here. I feel very fortunate and feel very welcome to share the space with you and to see so many students still signing up. Or good evening. Yes, I apologize. Is it? No, is it? It's maybe.
Yeah, it's evening right now. Yeah, it's about 6:30, 6:40.
Oh, yeah, that's evening. Yeah, that's early evening. Yes. So I'm very happy and feel very welcome to share my experiences and some of the things that I know. So yes, I would say to make things easy, I probably always call myself a futurist because I understand that people find it comforting to have labels. But I also like to say that that everybody is a futurist because we all use futures. Right? We all think about the future. We all imagine the future. We all anticipate. It has a very profound place in our lives. So in that case, we're all futurists. And one of the misconceptions, I think, about futures thinking, future studying, is that somehow we study the future. But what we actually do is that we study how we think about the future, how we anticipate. And that's a little bit different. Because I'm not an expert on the future, neither are you, nobody is. It's for the simple reason that we have not been there. So we don't know what it looks like, but we do have images of that future. And since there is no data on the future, there is data in how we think about the future. And those images of how we think about the future, that tells us a lot about our biases, about our assumptions, and that can also make us smarter, but also wiser in how we make decisions. So in this, I think I have about an hour, and I'd like to make this interactive conversation. So you already shown that you are not shy and using the chat, which is good. So please feel free to ask any questions in the meantime, or maybe Shams, you can help me a little bit. If they come too quickly, moderate a little bit, but just let's just have, so feel free to interrupt. I'm going to guide you through this whole reasoning of future literacy, a little bit what it's about, and the biases and assumptions, and hopefully it makes a little bit sense. But also feel free to ask me anything about my work or how I apply this capability. So I'm going to share the slides now. I hope it's going to work. If should be no. Okay, just a second.
Sure.
Yeah. I hope that you can see my slide now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes, wonderful. Okay, good. Okay, one yes is enough. Everybody's very excited. Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. So let me just talk you through this, and hopefully we can have, there's definitely room for questions afterwards. So please feel free to do that. So I want to take you, first of all, start with a quote. Now, I am not a reader of science fiction per se. And people often assume that because I work with futures that I must read a lot of science fiction. I don't. But I do want to start with a quote from a science fiction book. I think it was written somewhere in the 70s. It's called The Parable of the Sower. It's from a female sci-fi writer, which is also not very common. And she wrote this book, and it's called The Parable of the Sower. And it's about this young girl in a dystopian Los Angeles in 2025, so very close, and she's starting a new belief system, almost a new religion, a new belief system that she calls change. And she writes it when she's about 18 years old. She writes in it, and she walks through this dystopian America. She writes about how her ideas about what that will entail. And she talks about how that change is how we often make assumptions about continuity and about discontinuity. And what would happen if we would embrace change as an everlasting truth? And one of the quotes I like is that all you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. And I want to point this out because I think we are at times that we are trying to embrace change, and at the same time, we're also, it sometimes feels like we're trying to stop it somehow. We make a lot of assumptions about change, that going faster, that we don't really, we cannot keep up, that we can make change, etc. But if you accept that change is already always happening, even if we're not doing something, then maybe we can talk about. Oh, is there a question, or is that okay? Well, please, I'm kind of okay. Yes, change is universal truth. Nothing is the same forever. Exactly. So how do we do that? Because if we look at how we use futures and how we make decisions, with we I mean society, it's almost like we think that we can control it, and but we can't. Just as much as we cannot control uncertainty or complexity, we cannot eliminate it. But what we can do is change our attitude towards change and towards uncertainty and complexity. And by becoming better at seeing how life unfolds, we might even be able to take advantage of change when we are alert enough to see it and to observe it as an emerging phenomenon. So I'm gonna. So what does it have to do with futures? Well, we often, because we are sometimes a little bit afraid of change or uncertainty, we tend to see, the future like this one chord, and there's this one guy that kind of knows where he's going, which is walking behind, and let's just see, because this gives us a sense of security, but it's a false sense of security. It's not that certain at all. It's not that. It's doesn't feel that safe at all. Sometimes we feel that if we are betting on one scenario or one future path, or we invest in something that we think is going to happen, we think that is less risky. By trying to eliminate uncertainty, we feel it's less risky. But I would argue the opposite, that if we explore multiple paths and futures, then it becomes less risky, because then we become more resilient. So that is what future literacy is very much about. So when we're looking around us, what we often see is that the future is everywhere, right? I mean, this is this think tank, like a red ring. Yes, well, thank you. So the future is everywhere, especially in these times of this pandemic. We see that somehow the future is present, and there's always a very similar lingo around it. It's like we can build it or make it, design it, transform the future, etc. But there are two misconceptions. That is somehow that you can make it the future, and that there's only one. There isn't. There's not just one future. There are multiple futures, more than futures. Your futures might be very different than mine, etc. But we brand the future like somehow we can control it. And until a certain extent, we can control our actions and behaviors in the present. Yes, but only until a certain extent. So if we let go of that notion that somehow we can design the future, but start to accept the fact that what we do is we design future images, then we can actually look at those for what they are: images, fantasy, not reality. The moment futures become reality, they are the present. So building on that idea is that the future is uncertain, the future is unknown. I apologize for delay in the slides. That's just, I know Blackboard really well. My university uses it too. Sometimes there's a little bit of delay. So the future is unknown. Like I said before, there's no data. We've never been there. So yeah, that's just, so how can we relate ourselves to that? Now, you are following this wonderful course and around future studies and future thinking. And what I've come to understand is that you are exploring multiple ways of looking at futures, which is fantastic. I get a little bit distracted by the chat. So, so you're exploring all these different ways of using futures, and I just want to kind of map that out a little bit of where futures literacy, the work that I do, where that stands. If we say that anticipation matters and changes the present, there's a lot of there's a lot of work to be done. There is foresight, there is forecasting, there is scenario planning, there's horizon scanning, futures consciousness, futuring. You see it all on this screen. In that big tent of future studies is what we call futures literacy. And that is, there's a lot of overlap with other ways of using the future, but it's also a little bit different. It's different in a sense that it introduces this idea of anticipation for emergence, which is basically, can you use futures to become comfortable with what you not know? Can you use futures with not being able to predict? Can you use futures to become resilient? Yeah, if you can use it for many different ways for foresight forecasting, can we also use it to be open for emergence? And that's what this introduction is all about. So futures literacy, although it has futures in the title, it's very much about the present. It's about becoming aware of our underlying biases and assumptions that we have about the future. So just a quick definition. It's a capability, a skill, and it's about imagining multiple futures and using futures as lenses. And you can look through these lenses at the present. So not just imagining multiple futures and leave it at that, but actually taking those images and look at the lens itself. And you look through those lenses, being aware that these lenses are your biases and assumptions. That is the frame. If you look through glasses, there's a frame of glasses, or a frame in a painting or a photograph. You're looking through that frame, and that frame is made up of biases and assumptions. So every time you have an image of the future, there are always these biases and assumptions underneath. So if we become aware of the frame itself, then we understand what we are seeing if we're looking at the present. Now, that may seem a little bit abstract, so I'm going to try to break it down. And if I go too slowly or too quickly, let me know, then I'll speed up a little bit. So, what do if I say using the future? I've talked about it a couple of times now. What it is that what do I mean? The most common way for us to use the future is through planning. And in order to optimize something. So think about a desirable future. Maybe you can think about it for yourself, or maybe you can put it in the chat. That's something that you would really like to achieve. Maybe it's to finish your maybe it's to finish your studies with really good grades, or maybe you're planning for something. Maybe it's a trip, or maybe it's a family reunion, or to with friends, or maybe your career choices. So we often use futures for planning. Now this picture, I chose this picture because I'm a rock climber. And this picture is of a rock climber that climbs a mountain, a rock of 1,000 meters without any protection, so no rope. And he does that by only using his hands and his shoes. And he can only do that because he plans every step along the way in the crack. He planned it so carefully that he, in his mind, eliminated all uncertainty. So he could climb it without a rope and feeling absolutely without fear. Now, this, of course, is a pretty extreme way of planning for an optimal result, because it has the highest consequences if there's only one shred of an emerging event happening. So he's betting on the idea that you can eliminate all uncertainty. But we know that you can't, right? So, but this is often what we do. We try to plan everything. Another way to use the future is through preparation for contingency, or something that we think is going to happen. So maybe you can already think for yourself, what would be something that I think is going to happen? What do I prepare myself for? It can be a test, or it can be your job, or can be next rollout of the pandemic, etc. So right now in the Netherlands, we are again in a lockdown, and we're preparing ourselves for a lockdown winter where everything is closed. That's a contingency. That's what we predict that's going to happen. So we're already bracing ourselves for a winter that's coming. So these two are very normal ways of using future planning and preparation. But you cannot plan your way out of everything, and you cannot be prepared for everything. So we need to work with this idea of unexpected events, right? And that's what we call emergence. Things that are just at one moment in time, things coming together, they emerge, they appear, and that would not have been possible without any of these individual elements. Something just comes together, just wasn't there before, basically. So how do we do that? So the third way is not to be ready for unexpected events, but how to relate ourselves to unexpected events. And that is through exploration. And exploration, I mean by, can we explore different kinds of futures, not the ones that we like, or not the ones that we predict, but can we explore alternative futures to see novelty in the present? Now, what does that mean? Think about, I just asked you, what is of a scenario or a future that you desire, something that you like to happen? And that is something that we often do, that comes from within ourselves. Yeah? Then I ask you, what is a probable future, something that you think is going to happen? But by playing with an alternative future, let's say you can ask yourself a what if question. Let's say, what if the sun would not come up tomorrow? What will happen? Or what if trees could talk? By exploring multiple futures, we come to understand that, hey, there's certain things that we're taking for granted. And this exploration of different alternative futures is a different way than what we are used to. We never think about alternative futures that are not probable or not desirable. We just rarely do, because we're so used to planning and preparation. So by exploring, by stretching the imagination, we get to see different things in the present. We notice different things. So how does that really work? No. I just said that, just talked a little bit about assumptions. And every time we make a prediction, or we hope, we imagine a certain future, we always do this based on assumptions. I just said that, what if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow? That's kind of a strange scenario, because why wouldn't the sun come up tomorrow? It's a pretty, it's an assumption that is safe to make, not just because it's based on science, because it is, but also because it's based on repetition. Every morning so far, you wake up and there's the sun. So the sun, so you know that. So from all your life, it's always been based on scientific evidence, etc. So the sun coming up tomorrow, it's different than saying every day the sun comes up. That's a scientific fact. That's knowledge. Saying tomorrow morning the sun will come up is a prediction. Yeah. And even that is based on assumptions. So every time we use the future, we assume something. And that's not bad. We make assumptions all the time. It just becomes a little bit problematic or challenging if we are not aware of what kind of assumptions we are making. So without having any, insights in the assumption that we make, we present certain other assumptions like they are a fact. Maybe like the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Yeah? So this is really important realization, that if you're the most desirable future, you are assuming something. Are you aware of that? Where do these assumptions come from? Are they shaped? Are they formed? Are they from certain biases, from your upbringing, from your culture, from movies, from books that you read? I started with sci-fi. Sci-fi has a lot of influence on our biases and assumptions. So becoming aware of where they come from, that's what we are talking about here. And I think that's something you discuss in your course as well. So future literacy is becoming aware of those assumptions. That's it. And by becoming that, you can navigate between the different ways of using the future. So just in short, I hope am I still a little bit clear? Can you guys still follow me?
Yeah, let them talk about it, but
Okay,
I'm very
okay. Is there any questions so far? Okay, okay.
They were asking questions. I requested them to wait to listen in first, maybe, and then
Okay, good.
the question. Okay.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. Okay, wonderful. Okay, good. So basically, just to so basically, the framework is this. There are three anticipatory systems, we call them, three ways of using the future. And this is a little bit technical. Yeah, it's a little bit technical. So if you don't fully understand, that's okay. That's you don't have to remember every word I say, but it's kind of important to get a little bit of an understanding in this framework that we're talking about. Because if we want to become aware of our assumptions and how we anticipate, we need to dive a little bit into this. So basically, three anticipatory systems. One is planning for optimization. Yeah? The other one is preparing for contingency, and there's one is exploring, just engaging in alternative futures, and that so we can be open for emergence and novelty, spontaneity. Now, these systems are all based on what we call anticipatory assumptions, and I'm making use of Real Miller's framework of future literacy that we apply to higher education. So this is a framework that stems from UNESCO. So understanding that yes, three different ways to use the future, planning and preparation, we do that all the time. The other one, we don't do that very much. Yeah. So one we do all the time, the other one we don't do that very much. And these assumptions that are lying underneath, that is very important. So, okay. So let's just have a look at some assumptions. I already mentioned one saying that the sun will come up. Let's say if I make a prediction, it's going to rain tomorrow. What is, that's an assumption. Another one is technology will save us from the effects of climate change. That's maybe another prediction. Okay, I'm going to address this question for a second. I hope that's okay. So I'm just going to pause for a minute. You said there are many types of futures. Can you define them, please? There's some fixed certainties like death. We all know we're going to die someday. This universe will meet its end someday. But what other than this? Well, first let's talk about other futures. There are in the science of future studies, maybe you know the future cone of Foros, right? There are possible futures, probable futures, plausible futures, impossible futures, etc. So we can label futures. What kinds of futures are there? Some of them realistic, other ones are not. But like I said, I'm not very interested in that because I think what is plausible or desirable or probable really depends on the lens through which you look at it. What is a realistic future for one can be really improbable for someone else. I think that as many as there are people, there are always different kinds of futures. They just only exist in our imagination. Now, is it true that death is, yes, that is a fact, like maybe like change, but so yeah, so that fact in our future is going to happen at one point. Our mortality, we have not tackled that. That's for sure. However, there are still people who are willing to challenge that assumption and saying that maybe we can achieve immortality at one point. And I agree with you that there's and there might be people working on that right now, just to that being immortal becomes the next goal. When do we have everybody, then becoming immortal is the next Is the end of human progress? I don't know. But that's not, it's not, to me, that's not really important. What to me is important is that what are the implications if we accept that other future, that we are indeed immortal, that we can achieve immortality? What are we assuming? What assumptions and biases are lying underneath that? Do we think that that's going to make us happier or better? Do we believe that somehow, is there an assumption about the inevitability of progress? Is there an assumption about being healthy and living a long life is good, it's better? So, so to me, it's not, I'm not really interested in labeling futures, but I'm interested in seeing what lies underneath those futures when we make them. And Mohammed, you're asking your comment, he's finding someone trying to be immortal is finding his aim in the dark, which is not possible. I don't think so either. But there are people who act, sometimes they act like they do believe. So if they make that assumption, whether it's possible or not, then that's going to change their behavior in the present. If you know when you will die, and this first feels a little bit like a morbid topic to talk about, but if you know when of that's going to happen, that's going to change your behavior. So I'm less interested in what kind of futures, but I'm more interested in how that changes our behavior in the present. I hope that makes a little bit sense. So let's take this assumption about immortality for a second. On the slide, you see a few assumptions, right? That's going to rain, which is different than the one, immortality. We will achieve immortality very soon. And another one is like the only lasting truth is change, or technology will save us from climate change. These are assumptions, predictions about the future, a future image that we think. One is about tomorrow, one is about technology, climate change. Another one is about change. So why are they different? What is different about those assumptions? Are they different in nature? Do they address a different belief system? Do they address facts? To rain tomorrow, what does that really mean? You are assuming that maybe your app on your phone is working, or maybe you believe the science, or maybe it's a desire that you hope it's going to rain because it's been a dry for a very long time. So what does that mean if you say it's going to rain tomorrow in terms of forecasting? Yeah. Or maybe because you can look at the skies, the clouds, and that what gives you data. Now, the assumption about technology and maybe effects of climate change, that's another assumption that's less based on repetition, like the sun will come up. But somehow, if we present assumptions like this about the future that are not based on repetition or the past, other elements are added to the mix. Maybe it's politics, maybe there's an agenda, maybe there's a desire, maybe there's a belief system. If we say that we will reach immortality in the future, that is also not based on repetition, based on the past, but it has a profound impact on how we think, behave, and are in the present. So understanding that the assumption the sun will come up tomorrow or we will reach immortality are two very different ones. They just are. They come from different places. One science, one not. One is based on science, the other one is contradicting science. One is about repetition every day, short term. The other one is long term and maybe based on a certain desire. So understanding that there are different assumptions and navigating those and being able to question them, identifying, questioning them, maybe throwing them away or inventing new ones, that is futures literacy. Understanding what shapes the frame through which you look at. Yeah. So now I have a horrible. So in the framework of futures literacy is we identify several categories, and I'm going to skip through this one because this is a little bit too too dense. But let's just look at the pandemic, for example. And I just want to identify how we responded to the pandemic, because I think that has impacted most of the world. So if we look at the pandemic, just an example, my university, when it happened, they saw it as an opportunity to move all education online immediately. And they did that because they felt we cannot let students stay behind in their program. So whatever happens, we're going to move it online so we can continue with our planning and our preparation for the job market. That to me it's almost something so disruptive happened, and still we're pretending like we're just going to continue like we've always done, which is moving it online. And a lot of people would call that innovation. I wouldn't call that innovation. I would call that path dependency on a certain trajectory of planning and preparation, and not being open to the other opportunities that the pandemic gives us, to think about our identity as students or teachers, or what does it mean, or mobility, what does it mean to learn, what does it mean to be together, what does it mean to share knowledge together. There was a lot of opportunities in there to question all those things in the pandemic. But instead of that, my university moved everything online and still thought that we continue the same preparation for students for the same jobs, although the world has changed. That is that is what we call path dependency. So we're almost getting too attached to a certain outcome, and we're getting afraid of uncertainty. So, and a lot of other assumptions when I see around us in my country, when young people say, making the assumptions, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm not going to get the virus, or thinking about how can I become more healthy if I, if I exercise, etc. So when the pandemic hits, we're making all these different assumptions. And in future literacy, we try to identify them in 6 different categories. Some of them are based on statistics, are based on data, like the first one here. In 4 weeks, we can expect a 4th wave of the pandemic, in case in my country. So we do this based on repetition, on data, statistics. That's pretty set. But, I can also make the assumptions about that we don't know, and we need to incorporate uncertainty and complexity in our decision-making process. My point is this: you don't have to remember those 6 categories. They're not that that goes a little bit too deep, I think. But to understand that when we imagine the future, they're all based on biases and assumptions, and not only identifying those, but understanding that they're different and they come from a different place. And to be able to see that is when we can make different and make better informed decisions. And then we can see where the gaps are in our scenarios. And then we can even imagine even more futures. And then we can even be more open towards emergence and see things a little bit different. The moment you become aware of your blind spots, you're going to see different things in the present. And that's what we need, because, well, there's a lot of challenges ahead. So I'm going to move, I'm out of time. Going to move a little bit quicker, because I want to save some time for questions. So basically, the takeaways are this, and there's a lot to unpack here about the framework and the capability. So this capability is, like I said, challenging assumptions, right? It's about understanding how we anticipate, because it changes how we think and act and behave in the present. As I'm quoting my mentor, Real Miller, here, is that we suffer from the poverty of imagination, is that we're really not very good at it. They are heavily influenced. So every time we imagine something, it's most likely influenced by other stories around us. We plan and prepare to eliminate uncertainty, and we need to stretch our imaginations. That helps us being open for novelty and emergence. And that is anticipation for emergence. And we need both. We need to walk on two legs. We need both elements to be able to navigate and to do that. And this is a capability that can be learned and it can be taught. It just takes some time. But the moment we start seeing the future as not something that is coming at us and actually have an active conversation with, then we are already seeing things a little bit different in the present. And we tend to act a little bit less out of fear, more out of hope. I don't know, but a little bit less out of fear because we just become a little bit less dependent. So these all these capabilities, what I teach through future literacy laboratories and GEMS, and you have done this in developing this course, I know. So these are really hands-on workshops, follow certain phases, etc. And these workshops follow, understanding the way we use futures through planning and preparation, then exploring multiple futures through different ways, through different alternative futures, and then seeing things differently in the present. And research has shown what we do is that the learning outcomes of becoming futures literate is threefold. One, that we see an enhanced perception among young people like you, students and teachers. We see more. If you understand the frame through which you are looking at, you see more, you see different things in the present. You see different paths emerge, which may seem confusing, but it actually makes it less risky. You see opportunities. Embracing complexity. And embracing complexity is, I find that a bit tricky because people tend to say that life is becoming more complex. Oh, I hear my own audio, that it's becoming more and more complex, but it isn't. Life has always been complex, right? So, and by not trying to solve it or see it as a problem, but actually embracing it and appreciating it, it just becomes, you just tend to embrace different ways of knowing, appreciate not knowing, uncertainty, etc. And that can cause a new sense of agency. And that can actually help us to understand that, okay, if I plan and prepare, which we often tend to do, we tend to do something. Yeah? But there's also a way of, when you appreciate uncertainty, it's not about doing nothing. Not doing is not saying nothing. It's about being alert in a sense and seeing what is happening. Seeing different things you hadn't seen before, a new person that doesn't look like you, a new idea that you hadn't thought about. So the less path dependent we become and more open towards different futures and therefore different realities, the more resilient we become. And that's what we're, in my university, are trying to explore, trying to research, and hopefully leave our students feeling more empowered than they did before. So I think I've almost reached the end of what I mean, there's still a lot to share, but I want to leave some space for questions and leave my, the slide is a little misconstrued, but leave my email for anybody who would like to contact me. And I just want to close off to say that on a personal level, about assumptions and biases, I can share maybe one example. And it's kind of trivial, but at the same time, when the pandemic hit, which is probably the biggest change in my lifetime, is that before that I used to travel all the time, and I was always felt that was my happy place, a place where I would explore, where I would feel home. And then I, spent the 2 years or the year and a half after that at home. I really came to challenge the assumption that traveling somehow had to do something with mobility with physical mobility. And I had to really rethink that traveling, for me, it's about exploration. And we can do that anywhere. And that really I had to, took me a while to understand that it's not always about going from A to B. It's often going from A to A, and realizing that where I wanted to go was already where I was. And this idea of this linearity of a journey, that was just this construct that I had developed in my head. And that it was not always about going forward, but sometimes going deeper into the cracks. And it may seem a little bit philosophical, sound a little bit philosophical, but that's how it has helped me to kind of a little bit make sense of what is how this has changed my life. And yeah, and I feel that in that sense has given us an opportunity to talk to a lot more people than I did before. So I feel a little bit, I hope that everybody's still with me. And I'm not used to talking without seeing at least some photos, or so please feel free to ask me anything or to say anything. Yeah, I have no idea. Oh, there's a question from Mohammed. Is it, yeah? Some people think they haven't achieved what they want in life. To be preserved. Okay. Is that a question to me, Mohammed, or is that a rhetorical question that you're asking yourself? Okay.
I think this is for himself. Like in the end, he is wondering whether this is even worth it. Even I mean, getting his preserved is even worth it. So, but see, this is the question of value, and well, as Loes has already explained, we always have our values, our beliefs, which create our assumptions behind our ideas, whether it is about future or past or present. So we always have a frame of reference, and that is what our assumptions are. And you have a question. In fact, this is a question that we can ask ourselves and give you an answer based on our own assumptions. And finally, you are the value for yourself, and this responsibility falls upon you. So, what do you think? Oh, Basir wants us to answer it. Okay.
Okay. Okay. The only truth is change, which means the ultimate truth is change, right? I think. Well, it's from a book, so let's put it that way. So it's in, and she creates a belief system. But what I think, what I like to say, the ultimate truth. I think that everything is always changing. There's no thing, there's this saying that you can never cross the same river twice, because then the water will be different. And for me, I kind of, I like that quote, because it sometimes we feel, especially now, that we feel that we are change makers, that somehow we humans create change. But I just, that's why I chose the quote. I'm not sure of the ultimate truth. I think the truth. That things are always changing, and that sometimes change happens faster by not doing something. I hope that makes a little bit sense, but especially in times where we feel we need to act really quickly and we need to do something, and then sometimes we end up making the same mistakes, or keeping certain things in structure or in place, and by not questioning how things work. So sometimes things change in a different pace than we like, or maybe in a different way than we anticipated. But that's not always a bad thing. So that's why I chose this quote.
Hi, Loes. I'm Sobia.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, Loes, I'm just curious about, like, most of the time people ask me about how many assumptions should they make? Like, are biases present in our assumptions, or like if we are asking for if you're like making an assumption about the future, or either you're predicting it, or but there should be like side by side, there should be multiple scenarios also, or multiple futures also. So does it going to help us by making like multiple assumptions? And how many assumptions should like pandemic hit after 100 years, after 100 years we always heard that, and the researchers shows that after 100 years there is pandemic. So like we weren't prepared for the pandemic, and now it hits us and it has an impact on us. So like we weren't assuming it. So how you're going to assume anything which doesn't appear till now, or like the way you say is that there are always statistics which are showing us. So how you're going to base those assumptions, like how you're going to make them, how many should be there if you're preparing for any kind of uncertain future?
Well, thank you, Sobia.
Yeah,
Sobia?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you for your question. First of all, we don't need to, we make assumptions regardless, and we make assumptions all the time, right? So we do this without thinking about it. So every time we think about the future, we make an assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. We cannot make the right assumptions to prepare ourselves what's going to happen. We just can't. We just need to accept that. We will never be able to make all the right assumptions, make all the right predictions, and neither we shouldn't do that. I don't think we should, because there is a I think that's just not how life works or the universe works, right? We will never be able to be prepared for everything. The future will never be shock free. It just won't. But if it shocks us, because the universe is changing, life is changing too. But if it shocks us, it's not because it's a shock in itself. It's because we are so challenged by the assumption that, for example, the pandemic, we kind of knew there was at one point there was gonna be a pandemic. There have been some movies made about it. There's been some books written about it. There was like a black elephant, right? It was like a black elephant in the room. We kind of knew it was coming, but nobody really wanted to do anything about it. So, and then it came. It's not because that was a big surprise or a shock, because that's just life. Things happen. But the fact that it challenged our assumptions about continuity, about life, about work, about health. And that's what makes it kind of a shock, because we were so betting on a certain trajectory that so that's what it does. Every time something happens and it shocks you, surprises you, and it comes out of nowhere, it's just because you were assuming something else. And we should really have to let go of the idea that we need to be better at assumptions. No, we need to be comfortable with the idea that we cannot plan and prepare everything.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so very much, Loes. Shamama, we have with us, and like I guess she says that can't we make an assumption which is not biased? Like
Yeah.
probably she would. Uh, so, could you please answer
Yeah,
this? Like every time we are making
yeah.
unbiased?
I think we can. I mean, well, can you think of one? Let's say if I say tomorrow the sun will come up, is that an unbiased assumption?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's based on a scientific fact, namely every day the sun comes up.
Hmm.
So is that an unbiased? Yeah, I would say so. The problem, I mean, that's
Lois, we can also consider that a scientific bias. It
a
may be a
scientific bias.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, yes, that's true. Okay, but then you have it's based on repetition, right? So then I don't. Maybe there are people that say, well, in my life, there's been a couple of times the sun did not come up. Okay, but I think we can all agree on the idea that every morning, whatever part of the world, at one point the sun will come up. So then it's also based on repetition. Is that completely free of bias of certain rooted beliefs? Probably not. So it's really difficult to do that, because every assumption comes from somewhere. And whether it's scientific assumption, yeah, bias, yes. Or whether it's your own repetition or experience, yeah. So is that possible? Very, very difficult. But the problem is that sometimes if we mix those two up, if we say tomorrow the sun will come up with a certain certainty, most people will probably believe us. Like, yeah, okay, I got that. Yeah, I believe in that too. But if we present wild predictions about immortality, let's say, or about climate change, or about technology that is not based on repetition, it's not based on scientific evidence, it's just based on a belief, but we present it with the same certainty as we do tomorrow the sun will come up, then, and we do not understand there is a difference, then I think that's risky. Because the people who give predictions, futurists, people who say, oh, this is the Elon Musks of this world, can say in a few years we will all live on the moon or live in space. That's a projection without thinking, is it shared? What does it mean for people who are staying here? What is that, who's going to space? I mean, once you make that assumption and you do it with a certainty, like an assumption like the sun was going to come up, that's, if we don't understand that, hey, where do these assumptions come from? That I think is can be problematic, because then somebody might be colonizing that future, right, with a certain belief or agenda. So as with every bias and assumptions, we have to understand we all have them. There's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't hurt to keep examining, think critically, look at the narratives in the media, and just saying that, hey, I accept more than one future. I accept more than one idea. I accept the notion that there are more ideas, more stories, more futures possible. And I think that's just empowering itself. It's emancipatory, right? We do not just follow predictions of people, but we actually, especially the younger next generation, I can actually have a different relationship with the future myself. I can engage with it. Musk's assumption or statement is also biased. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think? What do you think? Yeah. So it's, and these are, and with assumptions, there's always kind of a negative connotation, like, oh, it's not good to assume something. But regarding the future, we do it all the time. We also make assumptions about the present. We also make assumptions about the past. And the past is not history. History is the story that we make of it. The past is what we, the stuff, and what we know of the past, the assumptions that you have, since the past also does not exist, are the things that are written down, or the artifacts that are lying around, or the stories that came off from generation to generation. So we also make assumptions. But, and the stuff that we have experienced ourselves, memories, are they without bias? So, and that's not as long as we accept that and incorporate that kind of that acceptance. Not, you don't have to question everything all the time. That gets really tiring. It's really difficult to get through your day. But just before you make certain decisions, critically look at policy or certain systems, power structures, power dynamics. It's healthy to look at, hey, who's making the prediction or assumption, and for what reason. So I would say that that's why I don't call myself a futurist, because I'm not an expert on the future. I just like to look at how we use features and what the impact that it has on students and people. So I think that's a more important distinction to make.
It's a very important, and this is something that when we were talking some time ago, you taught me, and that during that interview too, when I asked you that how do I persuade people to think about their future, and you said that you don't have to persuade them. Why would you want to persuade them? We all anticipate, so let us all anticipate, and we just have to be aware of our assumptions, and that's very important. Like, future, any kind of future is possible or impossible if we like to assume that, or probable or plausible, however we want to assume that to be. And it is just the idea of creating different kind of future scenarios and being able to do that tells us that we can understand our assumptions, and when we can use those assumptions to create our own stories. And whether it is coming from science or from philosophy or from religion or from any culture, all of them are assumptions and our beliefs. It's okay to have our biases. It's of our beliefs, but we should realize that they are our assumptions and our biases, so that we can create and reassess. We can do create some new bias to create another kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, that's why these, touch upon it really briefly, like these workshops that we give, we always invite students and teachers and faculty together, because it's so important to listen to each other's futures. That's the only way we can start to realize that, hey, my future is not the future. And that seems like such a simple thing, but it's really powerful to by listening to each other's futures and of each other's stories and narratives. That just really enriches our imagination and makes us wiser. So the power of the collective is incredibly important, because nobody owns the future.
Absolutely. And Harsha has a question. I think you would like to take that up.
The last one about people certainly believe in assumption of authorized person. Yeah, well, the predictions, yeah, absolutely. So even as a teacher, as an educator, right? So professor, but I always say that I want students to think. I will never tell them what to think. And from a personal point of view, I don't believe I'm more of an expert on futures, or an expert just because I read a few more books and I've lived a little bit longer on this planet. I think that every person comes with their own story. And I'm not saying that there's a respect for expertise and experience. Absolutely. You should always take that into account. But the idea that just because how I perceive knowledge and how I create a knowledge, that's come across to students the exact same way. No, you bring your experience and your stories and expertise to the table too. And together, for me, education is trying to make sense of that, and each have their role. I facilitate the learning processes. That's what I do. You are learning, you are engaging in dialogues, etc. So we all have a role to play. And yeah, if there's making a decision that if my boss makes a decision for me, yeah, I follow that decision. I'm not going to question everything. I know that. But I also tend to think that, hey, have a conversation together. So what's, there's a certain policy or decision-making process. Where does that come from? So, and I think that we can only do that if we negotiate shared meaning together. So that's why it's incredibly important.
So like basically, I mean, you are trying to understand the assumption of your boss, or where is he coming from? And that way you can have that kind of a negotiation and conversation.
Well, it kind of depends on what the context too. Not everybody can do that, Jan. So that I'm really aware of that. I'm really aware of that. But I think that sometimes I think it's a very important distinction to make, because yeah, I follow my boss too. I don't, but my boss does not, that whatever decision is made, that does not mean that it is my future or my identity. That's a certain decision that has certain impact, and that can lead to certain things. It still means that there's still room for uncertainty and not things and the unexplored and the not knowing and different opportunities. Okay, and as long as you believe that one decision is not going to determine the future, then you're already halfway.
Okay, do we have any other question? You guys can unmute yourself too if you want to speak up, or you can use chat. Ashir has another question.
Okay, I assume it can be a negative outcome. Yeah. Sometimes. Well, it kind of depends on the boss, but yeah, it's but that's something. But I don't want to make the assumption. In the Netherlands, we have a very kind of low. You call your boss by your first name, so it's very informal. So I would challenge my boss anytime today, but I also don't want to assume that that's the case everywhere. So there's not always space for be able to do that. But it's also important to realize that one person's decision does not determine the future. It just doesn't. Right? So that's important to understand that's what I wanted to make. But yeah, thank you.
It's very important. Like, I mean, you have pointed out multiple times That future is not written. Nobody knows the future. It is just the idea of future that we are trying to create, and whatever idea of we have, that is based on an assumption. If we reframe our assumption, we can create another story of our future. So that is very important takeaway for me.
Sir,
Yes,
like
so
in addition to negotiations and conversations, I do really that part, like that part that we are coming up with our narratives on the table and everybody can negotiate on it and the conversation part. So I really admire this thing that everybody has their own stories and they come up with their own stories. So there is not only single truth available, there are multiple truths, and this is really good. The negotiation part is really good.
are you trying to negotiate right now? Are you negotiating? Okay.
There's not a question about what the difference between truth changes or the ultimate truth is change. Well, it reminds me of this this Dutch writer who has this kind of saying that nothing is ever completely true, and neither is that.
Yeah. Yeah, that
I'll
the
leave it up to
uncertainty, that is the uncertainty principle, basically. Everything is
you.
uncertain. This uncertainty is uncertain.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
there we are.
Oh, nothing is entirely true, and there is that fact. So the fact that nothing is entirely true, that's also not true.
So
I know it's
it's gonna be both. So both
yeah,
truth changes and ultimate truth is
yeah,
change. Both of them are true at the
yeah,
same time. Can
exactly.
we assume that?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think so. I think
Yeah.
that's possible. Okay, is there any other questions? Oh, please, I mean, I'll put my email address if there's anyone who wants to contact me for one reason or another, then please feel free. Well, somehow it's not necessary. Well, sometimes it is, but every time we think about the future, we cannot but make assumptions.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we cannot say this is the future, because if it was, then it would be the present.
Assumptions are necessary, I guess, Aslam. Like, I mean, there is no other way. Whenever we talk, whenever we open our mouth, or whenever we do something, we are always making some assumptions. We always have a frame, as Loes has told us. Like,
Yeah,
we always look through that frame. So, being aware of the frame that you have gives you a chance, empowers you to reframe that, create
yeah,
another frame to the same thing.
yeah,
And there
yeah.
is no way you can get rid of assumption, even if you are a scientist, even if you are a mathematician, you cannot get rid of your assumptions. Being a mathematician, you say 2 plus 2 is 4, but that again is your assumption. So there is, I don't think if it is possible not to.
But let's. I just want to leave. Really want to say this before I leave. Yeah, we get really disappointed. I know. Aslam is it? But yeah, but this is why this is so important to being disappointed if things don't go the way they are. That's not very maybe not very helpful. This is about to make us resilient and understand that the universe has a unpredicted by nature, unpredicted by nature. So that's really important. And this will help you by exploring multiple futures, will help you become more resilient towards disappointment. Yeah. So that's really important to realize that this is one of the answers too. And how can we make good assumptions? Therapies together. No, well, I would stay away from judgment. There are no good or bad assumptions. We just make them. What is good for you might be different for another one. So as long as you're aware and just be a little bit, have mercy with your own assumptions. It's not about becoming better at predicting. It's about, almost like a sense of that we cannot control the universe, and maybe that's a good thing. So let's just see that whatever is happening in life, that instead of trying to hack it or trying to to control it our way, let's just say that let's start appreciating it. I think that's probably more important. And I also want to say that all these assumptions that we're making, don't let the complexity paralyze you. It's supposed to make you feel, mostly be emancipatory, a little bit empowering. Like, hey, there's another future lined up there, but somebody told me this is where it's going to go. But those are assumptions. What if something else would happen? So keep asking yourself that question sometimes, and don't have to do it all the time. Most of the time, we're assuming things and we plan and prepare, and that's fine. But there are definitely times that we are stuck and we can't see our own frames anymore. And that's a time where we need to take a step back. And that's something that you can train. Look at the frame. You can look outside of the box, but first you have to know the box to be able to look outside of the box. So what is the box of your thinking? What is the frame of your thinking? That's what this is about. And that will help you see more and make sense more of things. And help you make better informed decisions.
So basically, we are creating meaning. Like, when we are aware of our assumption, we are aware of the story that we are creating based on that assumption. So if the outcome is not expected, you can once again look at it and maybe you create different assumptions to find that outcome beneficial.
Exactly.
So it all depends on how you create your story, and realizing and being aware of your assumption gives you that power. It empowers you. It emancipates you in that sense. Okay.
Hopefully, yeah. Okay, Shams, I need to go, but it was really wonderful to be with you for over the past hour, and to all the students out there, I wish you all the best. Good luck, and it was really nice to be with you in this space just for a little bit, and I wish you hopefully we'll meet someday. Soon. And okay.
We would love to have you at our campus in Karachi.
I would love to go. Yes. If I come,
wonderful.
I will definitely let you know. If we're allowed to travel, if that's go a little bit the right way, then okay. Thank you so much. What an incredible, appreciative group. Wonderful students. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Loes.
No problem, Shams. Happy to join.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Loes. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, take care of yourself. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you. Bye bye. How do I leave?